Welcome to SLP Nerdcast. I'm Kate.
And I'm Amy, and we appreciate you tuning in. In our podcast, we review and provide commentary on resources, literature, and we discuss issues related to the field of speech-language pathology.
You can use this podcast for ASHA CEUs. For more information about us and CEUs, go to our website, www.slpnerdcast.com. SLP Nerdcast is brought to you in part by listeners like you. You can support our work by going to our website or social media pages and contributing. You can also find permanent product, notes, and other handouts. Some items are free, others are not, but everything is always affordable. You can also go to our website to submit a call for papers to come on the show and present with us. You can contact us anytime on Facebook, Instagram, or at info@slpnerdcast.com. We love hearing from our listeners, and we can't wait to learn what you have to teach us.
And just a quick disclaimer, the contents of this episode are not meant to replace clinical advice. SLP Nerdcast, its hosts, and guests do not represent or endorse specific products or procedures mentioned during our episodes unless otherwise stated. We are not PhDs, but we do research our material. We do our best to provide a thorough review and fair representation of each topic that we tackle. That being said, it's always likely that there's an article we've missed or another perspective that we haven't shared. If you have something to add to the conversation, please email us. We love to hear from you.
Hooray, I'm excited for today's episode.
Me too.
Before we go through the financial and non-financial disclosures and learning objectives, I thought maybe we should introduce our topic to our listeners. So what are we talking about today?
So today we are talking about visual supports for parents as communication partners of their young children.
This episode was fun for us to write because not only did we get to interview a guest, but as most of you know, Amy and I primarily work in augmentative alternative communication, where partner training is a really big focus of our professional interests and also our jobs. And talking about embracing parents as communication partners is really it's our jam.
Yeah, it was fun reading of articles for this one.
So why did we choose this topic?
I think that we are really passionate about communication partners. We recognize that, as speech pathologists, we are one person in a client's life, but their family and their caregivers are there, for the long haul. So by becoming a collaborative team with those people, we're better able to support our clients.
Hear, hear. I couldn't have said it better myself.
Oh, thanks, buddy. Also, we had a guest. Tell us about our guest.
So way back in the day, by way back in the day, I mean about 10 months ago, we were researching and reading some material for a different episode that we wrote. And we came across some materials and publications by a woman named Jean Blosser. I reached out to her to ask her some questions about one of her publications. She replied. She is an incredibly warm and lovely woman. And turns out she created some visual supports that were specifically designed for generalizing skills from school into a therapy environment or into the home. And because we are AAC people, we love the idea of using visual supports, particularly for helping parents and embracing parents as communication partners. We contacted Jean, and she was gracious enough to come onto our show to share some of this information and have a conversation with us about supporting parents as communication partners, because it's something that she's also very passionate about. And she also shared some tips and examples of ways to easily engage families using the materials that she has created. So our episode today is sort of divided up into two parts. First, Amy and I are going to review some literature and research about the importance of engaging parents as communication partners. And then we are going to transition over to our interview with Jean Blosser.
And she's going to give just some nice examples of all the things we talk about at the beginning.
Yes.
If you're looking to form a picture in your mind of what it might look like.
Yes. So let's just
disclosure time.
Yes, our boring stuff. Learning objectives for the day. Learning objective number 1, state 3 reasons for engaging parents as partners. Learning objective number 2, describe 3 teaching tools to improve home program development for parents. And learning objective number 3, describe 2 benefits of sharing visual supports with parents. quickly running through, yes, such fun stuff. Quickly running through our financial and non-financial disclosures. Financial, I am the owner and founder of Grand Bois Therapy and Consulting, LLC, and co-founder of SLP Nerdcast. I'm also a member of ASHA SIG 12, serve on the AAC advisory group for Massachusetts Advocate for Children, and I'm a member of the Berkshire Association for Behavior Analysis and Therapy, Mass ABA, the Association for Behavior Analysis International, and the corresponding Speech Pathology and Applied Behavior Analysis Special Interest Group. Jean Blosser's financial disclosures. Jean is the president of Creative Strategies for Special Education. She receives compensation for consulting and conducting professional development workshops and in-services. She is the author and receives royalty from the sales of the Let's Talk Today calendar. She also receives royalties from sales of authored books. Jean has no non-financial relationships to disclose.
And Amy, that's me. I'm an employee of a public school system and co-founder of SLP Nerdcast. Non-financial disclosures. I am a member of ASHA SIG 12 and serve on the AAC advisory group for Mass Advocates for Children.
Very exciting. Okay, so let's dive right into some of the literature about embracing parents as communication partners.
Well, and before we even do that, just connecting to kind of our first two learning objectives, thinking about reasons for engaging parents as partners and then some teaching tools to improve home program development. Like, research aside, this just kind of makes sense, right? I mean, particularly when we're thinking about younger communicators.
And we had a lot of good conversations about this prior to recording about how, using these strategies makes a lot of sense for a younger, more emergent communicator.
And it makes a lot of sense because communication happens with other people. And so when you're thinking about, a young child, particularly who's interacting with caregivers, family members, that other person is a really important part of, the communication doesn't happen in isolation. It happens in interactions with other people. So those parents, guardians, caregivers who are the primary communication partners, those are the people the kids are talking to the most. And when we think about, we talk a lot being in schools or an outpatient, we talk a lot about kind of paid communication partners. So people like teachers or therapists. And just like those people who may need training and support around what strategies are going to help facilitate and promote communication on the part of our client, the same can be true for family members. They may have interaction patterns in place that do enhance or promote the client's communication, but they could also have patterns that do the opposite. And probably it's a combination of both.
And I just want to, I loved that you had written in our notes here about the concept of paid communication partners. And I wanted to take that one step further and think about what that means. So a paid communication partner, you are assuming has a financial relationship with an institution of some sort, right? At school, a clinic, which also means they probably have some level of training. They are educated or in the field of communication sciences or disorders or special education, or even if they are, an aide or a paraprofessional, they've gone through some sort of organizational orientation or they work with other professionals in an environment. So when you're talking about paid communication partners, and I think it's important to note that that's a lot of the time different than parents who may not have that background in education.
I think that that's such a good point that you bring up. It's such a good point. And
I love
think
it when you tell me I make good points.
I love that. I love when you make good points.
Makes me feel good.
I think an extension of that too is even thinking about other paid people who may be communication partners in a child's life. You may have a babysitter, right? And that babysitter may or may not have the training, but the dynamic of their relationship is different, right? So as a parent, you are living your life and doing all of these things that have equal or, probably varying priorities as your day moves on. When you're hired to be a babysitter, there still are a limited number of tasks that you're kind of charged with at the time that you are, engaging as a communication partner. So, the variables can be different. And I think it's really a good point to make that many paid communication partners are going to have some baseline level of training coming into their relationship.
Yes, exactly. And I can say, the other thing about a paid communication partner is that they may have a little bit more of attention and focus because they're not multitasking. And I
Well,
say this
right.
as a parent because when my kids are doing their homework or when my kids are, you know, existing in my home, I am not necessarily giving them 100% of my attention because I am also doing other tasks that are asked of me in my household, like cooking or I don't know, taking a moment for myself, which I mean, most parents out there, we know how often that happens, right? So the home environment and parents as communication partners really is a very special group of individuals with a different skill set. And I love the idea of embracing that through a very specific lens.
Yeah. And I mean, in general, we want to increase those pro-communicative behaviors in the partners, whether they're paid partners or family/caregiver partners, and then decrease, some of those strategies that we've identified as ineffective or possibly even detrimental to our clients' language progress. And we talk a lot about this in AAC. We have a whole podcast about it in our first season where we talk about partner training in the context of AAC. But I think, when we're looking at broad-based family-centered interventions, it really is important to have that perspective going in and recognizing that just like every speech pathologist is different and every client is different, every parent or caregiver dynamic is different too. So we're going to need to really individualize this based on the family's needs.
And you said something there that I wanted to take a minute to talk a little bit more about too in the concept of family centered therapy. And I don't know if we're going to get into this a little bit more later, but we don't necessarily as a field embrace family centered therapy outside of a small handful of disorders. Now, maybe that's a really general sweeping statement. However, when you're talking about outpatient clinics, school based services, you aren't necessarily spending a lot of time face to face interaction with the family or even necessarily in their home. My experience is, and I know we had talked about this before, it was while we were planning, is that the family centered therapy tends to be limited to early intervention services and and other unique work settings or work environments.
I mean, I think this sort of brings us a bit back to the soapbox that we managed to get up on, like
Are you going to
many
say
of these
indirect
conversations.
service?
Yeah, I mean, it is. I mean, I
We need
think
to make a
that's
T-shirt that
we
says
do.
like
We
funding
should.
for
We should.
indirect service and speech
It's
pathology
super
because we see
important.
it every single episode.
I feel like it is every single episode, but it's so. I mean, obviously, I have big feels about it, but I think that it's a constraint. Time is a real constraint. It's very hard to be family centered when you don't have the time to form those relationships in the first place with people, and then to grow those relationships and then have meaningful conversations about what's best for them. And I think that it's a real limitation of our field. It makes me sad, it makes me angry, it makes me jump on the soapbox.
All the time. And I'm
Yeah,
right there
all
with
the
you,
time.
next to you on the soapbox. But
Ah,
I think, one thing that I do love though about this idea of using visual supports for parents, and we say visual supports, we're AAC people, permanent product, handouts, other
reminders. Yeah.
reminders, other physical things that parents can take with them to manage their own regulate their own pro-social, pro-communicative behavior with their children in the home because we don't necessarily, based on our work restrictions and lack of funding for indirect service, we don't have those opportunities to sit and spend hours and hours training them and counseling them. So a lot of times a visual support or a permanent product of some type is one of the best ways to sort of reach into the home or provide those reminders on a regular basis since we don't have time to do a Zoom call every day just with the parent for a half an hour to see how dinner time is going or whatever.
I agree. I mean, I think that, we're looking for bridges, things that can, bridge that gap between the one environment and the home environment and having things written down. I mean, we also talk a lot about that in AAC. We talk about implementation plans, for instance, and that's writing down what you're going to do. And, it's the same. It's all an attempt to bridge that communication. So, okay, obviously we both feel like this makes a lot of sense. How about more broadly? Like, does this apply outside of AAC? Is there external evidence for partner engagement when we're thinking about young clients? Yes, there is. And it
Did
turns
you go
out
down a literature hole?
a little bit, an itty bitty one,
A tiny one?
itty bitty one. And you guys can join me if you'd like, because the references are
There
going to
we
be up on
go.
our website. So parent training, I mean, that has been explored in the literature as far back as the 1970s. Roberts and Kaiser did a meta-analysis as well as some other papers that are up on our website. And in their meta-analysis, they talk a bit about, some of these studies. And, it's the early studies really looked more answering the question of, can we even teach caregivers these specific strategies? Yes, we can. More recent studies have asked the incredibly important question, does that matter, right? Like, if we're able to get caregivers to change their communication behavior, does that actually change the communication behavior of the child? Because we shouldn't just be doing something for the sake of doing it. And this goes back to that internal, evidence piece of, if you train somebody to do something and then they implement that with fidelity, if it doesn't have the result that you want, it was kind of time wasted, right? So they've seen, yes, that can positively impact child communication behaviors. So in this meta-analysis, Megan Roberts and Ann Kaiser published it in the American Journal of Speech Language Pathology, and they identified in this big review of the research that there were 4 kind of key areas about parent-child interaction that are associated with language development. And those are the amount of parent-child interactions. So they list a couple of different studies here, but one of them, just for an example of what this means, found there was a correlation between greater maternal joint attention and then child vocabularies between 12 and 18 months. With all of these, they're correlations, they're associations, they're not necessarily hard and fast causality. So you really do need to, just as a clinician, think about the external evidence. Like, okay, there was a study that found this. Let's say there was a study that found that there was a correlation between greater maternal joint attention and then a child's vocabulary between 12 and 18 months. That doesn't necessarily mean that it's going to translate absolutely to your client. So it's always important to think about, what does this mean for your client? But okay, so 4 key areas: amount of parent-child interaction, responsiveness. So just looking at, how often did, a lot of these are maternal, but correlations between maternal responsiveness to intentional communication and expressive receptive language after 12 months in children with developmental disabilities. Language input in general. So they've also found correlations between child-directed speech and receptive vocabulary, or the diversity of parent vocabulary use and then their children's subsequent expressive vocabulary. And then the final key area is the use of language support strategies. So to me, this is what we think about a lot, is actual explicit strategies like recasting or specifying relationships between objects and actions, modeling expanded language. And they've seen relationships between parent use of these strategies and the verbal skills of 3-year-olds, for example. So if you want to look through this article, their meta-analysis article, you can read a bit more about these 4 key areas of amount of parent-child interaction, responsiveness, language input, and language support strategies.
And the general takeaway in terms of how important it is to embrace parents as communication partners is that parent training is important. The literature says that it is important and is worth your time because it does have an impact on client communication skills.
It can have an impact. So the literature says it's important. The literature says we can teach parents to use some of these strategies, and it can have an impact. It's not a universal, it's not a truism. You need to evaluate it for your client, but that's a good reason to engage a partner. If there's engage a parent as a partner, teach them some strategies, it may have positive effects on your client. That's something to know and to try.
So let me ask you a question. So thinking big picture again, we've determined that we have limitations within our job structures. Embracing, parent training isn't necessarily something that we have time to do. There are ways, things like using visual supports and permanent products to embrace them. There are strategies around that. But what is parent training? Like, what does that even mean?
So when we think about parent or partner training, it's been described in some of the articles I read as triadic in nature, right? So it's you as the SLP, the parent slash caregiver, the child slash client, and you are really coaching the parent. So when we think about that, we're also thinking about that's a different dynamic than traditional direct therapy where you as the SLP are therapying to your client, right? So you're in a coaching model as opposed to a provider of the service model. And when we think about parents and caregivers, they are adult learners. So some of your strategies are going to be different, particularly when you contrast what your therapy session might look like, with a 2-year-old. You're going to use a different set of clinical skills to be effective in coaching a parent who is an adult learner. We found an article looking at AAC by Thiessen and Buchelman. They discuss different types of learning mode preferences for adult learners. And I think that this is something important to keep in mind. They identified a couple of different types, such as independent learners, small group learners, people who prefer to learn with like a case study approach, and then people who have a preference for step-by-step learning. Being aware of whether we're working with parents and caregivers or other adult learners, being aware that we all learn differently and have preferences around the way we like to receive information, I think is important.
And this is bringing me to something that we could have mentioned earlier about the importance of different cultural considerations and different value systems, and making sure that the strategies that you're teaching or the strategies that you would like another individual to embrace not only take those cultural and value systems into consideration, but that they're mutually agreed upon. So, that we are not the fixers, we're not the tellers. There is definitely a component here of, facilitating the wishes and values and cultural considerations of the other side of the table.
Couldn't agree more. Couldn't agree more. And I think that really does bring us back to this idea of being family centered. When we're family centered, we're taking into account, which is something that we should be doing in general. We want to be taking into account the important perspectives of all stakeholders. And you make a great point about the cultural differences. And just to rewind a little bit, in that meta-analysis by Roberts and Kaiser, they also make that point. And I think that that's something to be aware of, specifically as it relates to those 4 key areas of parent-child interaction associated with language development, because there are variations in what that looks like, specifically cross-culturally. And I think it's really very important, and they make the point there too, that there is not necessarily one right way to so you need to work collaboratively to identify what are the specific areas that you think are relevant for your client, but also meaningful and fit into that family's value system as well.
So in terms of the Thiessen and Buchelman article, and I know that was it was related to AAC, but I think what's important there is we're talking about teaching adult learners. Were there any big takeaways from that article?
I think the biggest takeaways there were just to be cognizant that when you're working with communication partners, you need to be aware of their preferences. They gave an example of, using a survey and just thinking about, finding ways to gather that information from people, being aware of having that conversation and having the communication partner be thoughtful about how they would like to receive the information and then sharing that with you. And we found another paper by Roberts et al., and they looked at a specific approach called the Teach Model Coach Review approach to work with caregivers on language support strategies for children who were working on expressive language skills. And in their article, they outline 6 strategies for adult learning, and they had gotten that information from Dunst and Trevette. And those 6 strategies included introducing, so previewing the strategy to be taught, illustration, so the clinician models the strategy, practice. So the caregiver would then practice the strategy. Then they have an evaluation component where you really assess the use of the strategy collaboratively. Again, collaboratively, the caregiver and the therapist assess how the strategy worked for the child's language, reflecting. So you reflect and kind of identify what you think the good next steps are. And then mastery is kind of the last phase in that, in which you're assessing the strategy use relative to some like goals or standards. And this is kind of a similar framework. I feel like when I read it, it made me think about some of the things that we had talked about with the AAC partner training, just in the sense that, again, when you're working with adult learners, there's sort of this flow of how to parse out the information to make it manageable and doable and successful and collaborative. So I thought that that was a helpful thing to consider when we're thinking about, again, kind of these visual supports for parents, for communication, kind of bridging that gap. With the awareness from our soapbox that we don't have the reimbursement for indirect services.
And yes, exactly. And also combined with all of those limitations, the reality that the home is a very unique environment, and parents may or may not have a background. They may or may not have the bandwidth. They may or may, you'll hear in our interview with Jean Blosser, I consistently use the analogy of having your dinner on fire. So,
Yeah. It's a lot of fires at your house.
You're engaging, there are a lot of unique things that happen in the home that I think are so very important to keep in mind when you're embracing parents as communication partners and parent training. We are excited to welcome to transition into our interview with Dr. Blosser. I wanted to take one quick minute to just tell everybody a little bit about Dr. Blosser. So she is an ASHA fellow. She has her doctor. She's a doctor of education, EDD. She is an NAP distinguished scholar and fellow president of Creative Strategies for Special Education. She is a special education consultant. She's an author. She speaks nationally. She's very passionate about creating systems to ensure therapy services are outcomes based and educationally relevant. And she's very, very passionate about collaboration. We were so lucky to have her come and join us for today's episode. We did want to note that throughout our conversation with Jean, we reference a product, and the product that we're referencing is this visual support that she created. It's a calendar, and it's a really great example of the kinds of permanent products and visual supports that can be used to enhance home programming, to sort of as a strategy to overcome some of the limitations that we just described. We realize that in podcasting format, sometimes it's hard to translate a visual support because no one listening can see it. But at any point, if you're wondering what we are referencing, Jean was gracious enough to share a free month of the calendar, and it's available on our site for free to download for free. And she's also offered a discount on the purchase of the calendar, and it's specific. The title of the calendar of the support is called Let's Talk Today. The cost is with the free code or with the PayPal link that's on our site, the cost of the calendar is $18. That includes shipping. And that's down from $22 plus shipping. So it was very gracious of her to offer that to our listeners. If you are interested in taking a look, you can download a month for free on our website. And you can also use the PayPal link that's posted in the episode notes to take a gander. So without further ado, we are very excited to welcome Dr. Jean Blosser. Today, we have the great pleasure of welcoming Dr. Jean Blosser. Welcome, Jean.
Thank you.
We are so happy to have you here.
And Jean, you're here to discuss parent and communication partner engagement and the importance of visual supports. And as a visual learner myself, I am a big fan of visual supports. Before we get started, can you tell us a little bit about yourself?
I will. So one of the things that I always explain, and first of all, let me say this is my first podcast.
We're so excited to have you.
I'm really excited. I've never done one before. I barely listened to them unless they were, something political or something. So I'm totally excited about doing one that's professionally related. So thanks for inviting me. When I explain about myself, I always say I've been in the profession for decades. And the word decades, like you can expand on decades, for many, many decades. So I can't possibly go through all of the types of jobs that I've held and things that I've done, but I can say that I have a passion for my profession. So speech language pathology. I'm an Ohioan by birth, and I went to 3 different schools in Ohio. I went to Ohio U for undergrad and Kent State for my master's, and then the University of Akron for my doctor's degree in higher education administration. So I think I'm a speech language pathologist that has kind of danced outside the norm of the field. But the passion for speech language pathology has always remained, and the passion for working in schools and anything about school service delivery. So that's where I've spent my career. I've taught, I've supervised, I've led companies, I have been an entrepreneur. So I have, like I said, danced any way you can within this profession, and I'm still hanging in.
That's so cool.
Well, we're so excited to have you. And I know that our listeners might find that your name sounds familiar. And that's because in a previous episode where we reviewed mentorship and critical feedback, we cited some of your previous lectures that you have done on mentoring and supervision. So I'm the first to say I was one of your asynchronous virtual students in the webinars that you have given. And I was so excited to send you an email, and you emailed me right back. So we're so excited to have you here. Before we get started in talking about this topic, first of all, we're, as two AAC people, we love the idea of visual supports, and we're so impassioned. Impassioned, is that a word? We're so passionate passionate about the role of the communication partner. So this is going to be a really great episode, and we're so excited to have you.
Jean, tell us all of the things.
Okay. Well, it's interesting that you are both have AAC backgrounds, because, and that you mentioned communication partners. So throughout my entire career, I have always felt like the communication partner needs to play a bigger role in trying to, not just help their child, but understand what their child's problems are and what the challenges are of having communication impairments, and also to know what to do. And so that's always motivated me quite a bit. And working in schools, I focused a lot on teachers, but then the parents were always wondering, what can I do? What can I do? How can I help? And I always wanted to give an answer to that question. And so I would say that from my entire career, I've focused on trying to incorporate communication partners in whatever the intervention was and whatever the child's problem was. Okay, a lot of my attention on communication partners and the importance of working with communication partners really solidified when I was at one point in my career, maybe in the 80s. I was focused really on school reentry for kids who had sustained brain injury. And when they were returning to school, it really just kind of struck me that because they had changed, that people needed to understand what was the child like now and what did they need to do? What was their role in trying to help the child, perform as best they could within the classroom and home setting. So the words, like develop communication skills that would enable success in home, school, community, and work, kind of like melted in my brain. It's just like, oh my gosh, this is exactly what we have to do. And then there are so many different communication partners within each one of those settings. It's like, well, how can we generalize, and how can we get them involved and engaged and excited about their role and what could they do? And then I'm actually a pretty practical person, so I brought everything to a practical level about how can I interpret all of this. Yeah, so that's kind of all. I'd say that was my motivation. All of those things kind of stimulated me along the way.
I think you make such great points. And as somebody who has been school-based for a long time, but worked, outpatient in other places too, I think, that what you were saying really resonated with me, because when we think about parents, and parents in particular as a communication partner, they're us school people, we come and go. The outpatient people, they come and go.
Yeah.
Parents are for always.
Exactly. And actually I've written that in some of my publications. I say, we just transition through their lives. And so we only get that little slice. We don't even really know what it's like to go through a whole day with somebody. We only know that little slice
Yep.
of what we know. And unless we start listening to and talking to the parents and the teachers to know their perspective, we cannot really figure out how to help and
And
what to do.
and I think another, thinking about Amy, what you said related to parents are there for always. And Jean, what you said about us being so transient as, educational professionals, that level of, the parents are the thread of continuity.
Absolutely.
It's not just the whole lifespan, but this is what we worked on in first grade, or this is what the speech pathologist worked on last year. And, carrying forward that, not just momentum, but carrying forward the information from staff member to staff member, from setting to setting. That's so crucial.
Yeah, it's crucial. And the whole thing is to give them the confidence too, that they are the ones who can be in charge. And it's a scary thing. And so, you have to think about, well, how do we do that? How do we figure out how to, give them the information that they're seeking in a form that they can understand it and accept it and retain it and use it in the future. And then how can we kind of prepare them to know so much that when the child is moving through all of these transitions and settings, that they can be sort of literally in charge and know exactly how do they explain it to the next person, how do they recognize that this is something new, this is what the person's working on. And now we have all these parents that are confronted with the role that they're taking on because of COVID, of teacher, therapist, and working mom or dad, and trying to figure out all of this. And I thought, oh, I gotta dust that thing off and talk about, what can parents do that's fun, engaging, and will help their kid.
I think I think it's great. And I think, I'm also a parent, and, Amy's worked with a million families over the years. And it's so true that the home environment is so different from the school environment. And if you think about, it's so easy for us as clinicians to, oh, today in therapy, we're going to work on this. But when you translate that into a home environment, your dinner is burning, you've got other siblings running around the house, you've got, laundry you need to fold, you've got, an in-law barking at you about something, there's like 1,000 things going on. So, it's so important to make sure. I love the idea of visual supports to help bridge that gap and make it something that is sustainable and achievable for the parent. And it's making me think about something that we've been talking about on this podcast a little bit, which is treating the whole family, not
Yeah.
just the client, and really considering the family unit when you're considering your intervention strategies, your goals and objectives, and all of those kinds of things. So that makes it makes so much sense.
Yeah.
It should be more obvious than it is.
Well, the funny thing is that I never would refer to it as a visual support. So when you guys started referring to it, just even in this conversation, as a visual support, I'm like, oh my gosh, it's a visual support. Because I wasn't thinking in those terms. And when you mention it, I'm like, yeah, I think I just developed a visual support and didn't know it, because I was kind of looking at it more. I don't even know what to call it. I was like, sometimes I refer to it as a home program because it's something that, any provider, and I don't really restrict it only to speech language pathologists. So I want to put it in the hands of SLPs, PTs, OTs, preschool teachers, early interventionists, the paraprofessionals. I want it in everybody's hand, because the design of it really is something that it's trying to get some consistency, and it's trying to also build skills of the parent and build skills of the child. So there's really a lot of components to it. The visual part of it is that I try and keep it sort of up front. And so literally it's a calendar. It's a 12-month calendar with one activity each day that parents or even a babysitter or preschool teacher can engage in with a child.
It's making me think of all of, in terms of treating the whole family and, considering the parents as communication partners and all of the visual supports that we naturally use as humans. So if anybody has seen pictures of my desk with the sticky notes all over it, reminding me to do things, I feel like the power of the visual support, not because you're parents, not because you have a child with special needs, but because you're a human and
Yep.
no one can remember everything, is really an important strategy, because you do need to make sure that when you learn a new skill, that it's meeting parents where they are and leaving room for growth, and doing one thing a day, I think is a really nice way to pare it down and make sure it feels manageable and achievable.
Correct. So the idea of skills too. So to think about skills, to think about that. What I did with that was I started to focus on what skills does a child need from preschool to, let's say, grade 3 or 4 to perform in school and to do well in school. So what language, what communication skill does a child need in order to succeed in school? That's kind of a starting point, right?
Right.
So each activity addresses one of those skills or more than one of those skills. So the language arts curriculum in school has kids learning how to do things like describe objects, name objects, follow directions, answer questions, be able to tell a story, be able to remember and recall facts. So what I did was identify those skills that kids have to succeed at, communication skills, speech and language skills, that a child is expected to succeed at when they get to school. And I made sure that each activity, each fun daily activity, somehow or other addressed one or more of those skills. So educational relevance or home relevance, something fun, something to keep attention, and something that helps the child figure out where they are in space and can engage their thought processes, their physical motor processes. So it's not really meant to be like a checklist. We got to do this. Oh, you didn't do it. The kid didn't like it. He didn't follow
It's
through.
an
It's meant to
activity
be
inventory.
activity inventory. There you go. It's an activity inventory. And it's relevant. And that's the thing. I wanted it to be relevant to the language arts curriculum. The design of the calendar, what I did was I put a daily box for every day for 5 weeks. And so that totaled 400 activities. So there's literally 400 activities. Language facilitation activities that I selected were all research-based. It started with me watching myself as a speech language pathologist. What was I doing?
Right. How do we break it down? Because
How
we
do you break it
do
down?
this and you're like,
How
oh,
do I
you're
get
doing your
success?
speech therapy, but what is that? How do you translate that to non-SLPs, people who didn't get
Exactly.
clinical, supervision and feedback?
Exactly.
And I think, can we just make that point really clear, though, for 1 second, and how important it is to do that as a visual support? Because we have training. So as an SLP, I think, oh, placemats, that's a great idea. And it automatically in my brain do everything that you just did. Oh, we can work on numbers. We can work on this. We can
Exactly.
work on that, because that's my training. But I think another really important component of using this, using these visual supports for families, is because we can't make assumptions about that training. I mean, imagining that scene I painted before with the dinner burn. I mean, maybe it's just my own household with my dinner, or like, and, people, just a chaotic scene. But when you have a visual support that can give you a step-by-step instruction. You're really bridging that gap between other people's, bandwidth, other people's resources, other people's value systems, other people's time allocations, because different settings require different levels of support and different settings require different accommodations. So I think the visuals, and then we say this for our students, why wouldn't we say this for ourselves as people? Those visual supports can really help bridge those gaps. And I think that's really important.
Well, and it doesn't come natural for parents, obviously, to realize what we just went through with this placemat thing, right?
Right.
Numbers, colors, words, sentences, creativity, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So there's, I built into the overall kit, let's call this a kit. Let's talk today. And it's a calendar of daily activities for teaching language skills at home. And it's a kit. The kit part of it is there's an instruction page for the parents that explains just what you just said. But you asked about, Amy, about the speech and language facilitation techniques. And
Yeah.
so that I've simplified as well. And it's not, we have really complex
Yep.
and integral ways of working with our kids when we have them in therapy. But like I said, I stepped back and kind of watched myself, and I thought, okay, what am I really trying to accomplish here? Trying to elicit good speech. If the kid doesn't say something right, or if he's not hitting the target, what do? I modify it, try and modify it in some way, making it longer, making it better, improving the sound of it. And then I reinforce that was good, or try it again. So that's what I want the parent to learn how to essentially do through my guidance.
Yes.
But I picked 10 simple language facilitation techniques, and I call them tips for success. And I boiled them down to each one is explained in about 1 or 2 sentences. Believe it or not, our field, is complex. But when you're talking to somebody who lacks confidence, who lacks experience, who doesn't have time to concentrate, who this wasn't really their major, but it's not something that they were thinking about doing. So I boiled it down to 10 simple ones, and I'll tell you what they are, because I think it's important for us to recognize. Make talking fun. That's one of them. If you think about our speech and language and special education, OTPT, one of the things we try and do is build in some level of motivation. So make it fun. And that's what a lot of the activities are about. Second, expand. Expand on what the child says. If he gives you one word, then expand it to 3 or 4. If he gives you a couple of sentences, expand it into a story.
Yep.
Somehow or other, take what you're hearing and expand upon it by doing either modeling or encouraging with questions and things like that. Number 3, ask questions. So try and figure out how to elicit your child's talking by asking some questions. Be interested. That means be interested. Talk to yourself. We do that all the time.
Yes, that's such a speech and language strategy.
It's a speech and language strategy. I mean, honestly, these are all things I watch my mom do. Go back to my mom. This is exactly what she did naturally, right? So
narrate that stuff.
Grandma's gonna get the bowl out. Now I'm stirring. Oh, it's big, it's small, it's round, it's big, whatever. Just talk to yourself and describe actions. So we describe what we do. We describe our behaviors. We describe our movements. We describe what we're going to pick up, where we put it, where we hit it, how we cut it. We reading to children. We know that helps. And so trying to read to children, we know that early years that does stimulate language. Listen. So listen. And this is a big one, because I think a lot of times we don't listen to what children have to say, and we miss it. We miss the opportunity to turn it into some really good conversation. So try and help people listen. Name and describe objects, provide good speech examples, and talk naturally. So we're not trying to create speech pathologists here. We're trying to create interaction, engagement, playing, enjoying, and doing that. And so that's kind of the whole crux of the whole thing is activities around goals, around language facilitation techniques. And you put that all together, and what you've got is a teaching tool for working with parents, and they love it. And then you can become prescriptive. You can circle the specific language facilitation you want somebody to use. You can check, the different kinds of behaviors you want them to get, or you can send it home, make it be 365 activities, a very simple home program, because a lot of us struggle with home program development. And
I mean,
so,
as a working parent, I struggle with a lot of things in my home. Amy's laughing at me because I'm always like doing too many
because
things.
our food is burning the whole
Yeah, my
time.
food's on fire all the time, apparently. Exactly.
Yeah.
But I think, again, I feel like a broken record, but just this, the idea of when you said prescriptive, it really made me think of what we do so much as speech pathologists, which is, we just tell people what to do and send them on their way. Right.
Yeah.
And in my earlier career, I made the routine mistake of sending parents home with like a super long list. And now that I'm a parent, I'm like, shaming myself. Like, why did I do that? You have to make things manageable. And I love the idea of a bank or an inventory that can be used to choose one thing. Okay. So I noticed that in our speech sessions with your son or daughter, X, Y, and Z teaching strategy really has helped. So really we're talking about visual supports, not only for the activity, but visual supports for the teaching strategy. And I think that is, when your dinner is on fire, coming up with an activity is hard, but coming up with a teaching strategy could be even harder.
Exactly.
And I can't say that enough, because, if any of our listeners out there who, are making the mistake that I made for years and years and years, I think it's really important not only to get our parents involved as stakeholders and, consider the whole family as a client, but also to meet them where they are on their learning trajectory and give them tasks and recommendations that are not only in line with their value system, but things that they feel are achievable. And I think that, at least I can only speak for myself, I made that mistake for a long time. We're ethically obligated to write objectives in an IEP that are achievable within a year. Why wouldn't we take that same philosophy to our communication partners, instead of just expecting them to like know a device right away, or,
be a speech therapist without going
overnight, that's not
or
exactly
or discriminate,
right. Especially since, we started this whole conversation acknowledging how important parents and caregivers are to the communication, to the communicator, to the client or the student. I mean, that all of those concepts of continuity, generalization of skill to the home environment, advocacy, emotional support. I mean, the home environment is critical. So taking these visual supports and things like this calendar to bridge that gap is it's just it's like a great idea. I don't know why we didn't think of it before. It's great.
So, I've had really good feedback from people on it. And the feedback has come from kids. Basically, they love it. And they love it because it's their thing. So what are we going to do today? And so, and I started passing it around to people during COVID, because people were, when COVID first started, and
I know.
kids were, stuck at home, and the parents were trying to work, and
we were in closets drinking wine. I don't know.
Well, I do that. So that one's a given.
And I gotta say, I mean, not again to use my own experience, but when we are talking about parents, so I feel like it's appropriate for me to draw upon my experience as a parent. When my children have things that they need to work on, to me, it's work.
Yes.
For me as a parent, I feel like it's time to work. I have to sit at the table. I have to go through their stupid math worksheet or whatever it is that they're working on. Sorry, kids, if you ever listen to this, they're too little to listen now. But to me, it feels like something else I have to do during the day. And I do have fun with my kids, and we play and we go do preferred activities. But when it's coming from school, no one can see me. I have air quotes. When it's coming from school, or it's coming from a specialist, or coming from a teacher, I feel like it's homework.
Yeah.
So the concept of making it fun is like, well, of course it should be fun. So when
Yeah.
my son comes and he has like, homework for math, I'm not thinking about super creative ways where we can count. I'm like, okay, let's just get this over with so I can get back
Right.
to my
And
burning
then you can't
dinner.
even do it because you didn't learn how to do new math. Right.
Right,
So,
exactly.
yeah.
Right.
And
Right.
exactly. So, I think it's transitioning the lens from homework to fun is really not as easy as we think it might be. And
Yeah.
it might not be as intuitive as we think it might be because the perception from the parent may be that it's homework, that it's extra
Well,
stuff that they have to do.
yeah. So, and also a lot of times the form of homework from speech and language is here's a
Drills.
list of words that make no
Oh, yeah.
sense.
Yeah.
Make a sentence that who cares?
Do these
So
Oh,
flashcards.
I'm
everything's
the worst. I
relevant.
used to give
Yeah.
families data
Yeah.
sheets. How not fun is
Exactly.
that?
Data sheets make it. Yeah. Count. Yeah. Right. Oh, yeah. How bad is that? No, but it's because that's where our thinking was, right? So I could turn this into data if I wanted to. I could have a parent reporting back and
Yep.
in a conversation, how'd it go? What did they find particularly difficult? Did you try some activities with them? Maybe one a week. How about next week trying 2 a week? So the other thing is be very forgiving. It's like, get that people are busy and try and understand. And I also try and break it in little pieces. So it's not like you have to do these 10 techniques. No, it's try reading this week
Yep.
or this month. Try reading activities this month about some of the things that are on the calendar, And so the other thing is that in terms of being forgiving, decide when you're going to be, it's the best time to do it. Maybe for some it's night, maybe it's on the way to school, maybe it's on the weekend. Do more than one activity if they want to do more activities. Skip a day if you're too busy and the dinner's burning. Use 3 tips for success. Try some special ones. I'll give you some recommendations. Compliment your child for trying, and that's a big thing.
Mhm.
We don't need them to be the discrimination. Oh, it's perfect. Try it this way. It's like more like compliment the engagement. Be happy about the engagement. And then feel free to like repeat activities if there was a favorite. I mean, these are just like enjoying time with your kid and then talk to.
That's such a good. Oh, sorry. Go ahead.
No, go ahead.
I feel like that's such a common thread throughout all of this, right? So you've
Mhm.
talked about these different language intervention techniques that you've simplified. But the first technique that you mentioned was make talking fun. And I think that when we think about younger children who have communication disorders, probably talking hasn't been fun for them in some way or
Mhm.
another. And it's probably been a challenging time for their family as well, or it's a
Right.
place of stress. So, when you're able to engage parents in learning these strategies, and even if the only strategy they walk away with is this can be fun and we can have
Yeah.
fun together and it doesn't have to be a source of stress. I think that can be really impactful for the family as a whole, and
Right.
that's going to have ripple effects for the student, but also for the parents. And that is something that's going to help move them forward, with all of those other things that you talked about, in terms
Mhm.
of building their confidence and helping them feel like they have, a strong voice in the team. I think it can be really hard to feel like you have a strong voice in any conversation where you're not feeling confident and positive
Mhm.
about, what you're talking about.
Yeah. So one of the things I really honed in on in that time period when I was doing a lot of work with, reentry back into the school setting was the huge like IEP meetings or any kind of like assessment report kind of meeting, summaries and things like that. And it was like all the professionals around the table would say their report. There's like the OT said what they said, the PT, the SLP, the social worker, the teacher, and the parents and they'd always end their conversation with, do you have any questions? No. Okay, blah 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 blah. PT. Any questions? No. Da 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 da. Any questions? No. And one of the things that I kept noticing was there was no integration of plans, which I just can't stand the fact that there's no integration of plans. Like the speech pathologist and the OT should be working so closely together, and the goals should be, very closely linked. And the parent should get that and know that. But the parent has a role at the table. And when we only say to them, do you have any questions? No. So when they start seeing, wait a minute, I have a role. I tried this and it did or didn't work, or
Yep.
gosh,
Mhm.
I found him, having struggles with this. And and then now they have a place at the table and they can talk. And so the instructions to the parent and the instructions to the user are all about, this is a interactive thing. This is an engagement thing. This is a work together thing. And it's supposed to be around helping your kids succeed at home and at school. And that's where I think that the difference is in some of this is, what the focus really is in terms of practice. It's not quite the same practice.
And jumping off on that, the concept of having a seat at the table and the vision of the IEP meetings that we've all been in, where it's less participation on the part of
Right.
the parent and more consumption. And thinking about the emotional place that they might be in during that meeting,
Mm-hmm.
or the anxiety, or the processing that they're doing. Um, and again, I feel like I'm just now repeating myself, but the power of the visual support, right?
Yes.
So, taking the, an inventory of activities or an inventory of teaching strategies, really those teaching strategies,
Hmm.
and using them as a jumping off point to mutually come to, what activity or teaching strategy feels most in line with that family's values.
Yeah.
What
Or
teaching
which one do you think you
strategy.
can do?
Yes,
Yeah.
which
Yeah.
so instead of just saying go home and read, well,
Yeah.
what if they don't have access to a lot of books?
Right.
What if the parent has a learning disability and reading
Hmm.
out loud is hard, or anxiety provoke? We don't know. I mean,
Right.
I think
Exactly.
using the visual support as a
Hmm.
mutual jumping off point
Hmm.
to collectively and coercively and collaboratively come. Coercively was not the right word,
Yeah, that was the
but
wrong word.
Oh no, but this is pretty
you don't want
pretty
to coerce
collaborative.
anyone. Retract. But
Yeah.
collaboratively coming together to come up with a plan, not only for the
Yeah.
activities that they do, but the teaching strategies that they implement to
Yeah.
make it, just like you said, the SLP and the PT working really closely together to
Hmm.
create objectives. That's what we should be doing with our families. And don't get us on the soapbox about how we don't have funding for indirect service and how speech
Right.
Right.
pathologists don't have enough time to do this effectively in their jobs. What's nice about a visual support is that you can send it home. It's
Right.
permanent product. You
Yeah.
can, collaborate with it asynchronously, sending it home back and forth in a backpack or in a folder or
Or
emailing it,
emailing it.
Yep.
because
Exactly.
we don't have time built into our schedules to sit and have these conversations, which is terrible. And we need to
Yeah.
do something about it as a field. I'm off my soapbox now, but I just really want to come back to how nice it is to think about trying to change the conversation to give the parent a seat at the table in
Yeah.
terms of generalizing skills from the school, from the therapy room, and making sure that they feel part of the conversation in selecting activities and teaching strategies that are doable for them.
Hmm. Well, you bring up the point of how does the SLP or other provider get it? So on the SLP's page or the user's page, it's like, how am I going to get this in the hands of the parents? So that what are the X number of ways? Well, everything is step by step, and I think in step by step kind of formulas for myself too. So it's like I have to think, do you want to use it as a home program? Do you want to use it as an explanation of what we're working on? Do you want to use it as a method for getting more involvement? And like some schools are trying, one of their goals for a multi-tiered system of support is to increase parent engagement. Well, guess what? In a nutshell, this will increase parent engagement. So,
Well, I think just to sort of recap everything that we've discussed, and to, really bang the point home, the parents as communication partners are so incredibly important. And we, as speech pathologists, are really obligated to not only consider their values and consider their wishes and their goals and learn from them about our students in the home environment and community, but giving them a way to help us generalize skill,
right.
and participate in some of those conversations. And I can't say enough about
Mhm.
the power of visual supports for us as human beings and for us as therapists, as ways to help generalize and facilitate some of those skills. And I love the idea of the visual support having an inventory of not only teaching strategies, but teaching not only teaching strategies, but activities that people
Mhm.
can do, which is so nice. And just
Yeah,
super
and
great.
it's set up like it could be a sort of a record form too. There's place for notes. There's some place where
Okay.
people can kind of make notations. Even if you just say, you know, yeah, we did it or didn't do this activity, or a happy face or a star, it was great, or you didn't like this or did like that. It's also
So much better
something.
than a data sheet.
Yeah, yeah, really. Or can you make a sentence out of this word?
Right, exactly. The
Yeah,
worksheets.
yeah. So the practicality is huge. It's very visual, so it's kind of fun thing to look at. And so I think you've done a great job of asking questions that are professionally like descriptive.
Oh,
So,
good. Well, that's our job. So,
yeah, I know you wouldn't know that I spent like a lifetime in university teaching.
well, thank you so much for all of
Yeah,
this. We
yeah.
really appreciate
Uh,
everything.
yeah.
And we're very excited to share all of this with our listeners.
Good. Well, you both are fun, and I wish you the best on your podcasts. I'm going to tell everybody about them. So
Oh,
this is
good.
this
Well,
is great.
thanks.
Awesome.
Yeah, because I think this is one of those things. It's like what an easy way to learn and share information. So thank you. You guys are doing a great job. I had no idea.
Thank you
This is what
so much.
nerds are all
Thank you so
about,
much.
right? So
That's right. Well,
yeah.
thank you again so
Okay.
much for
All
joining
right.
us.
Okay. Thanks, both of you.
Thank
Love it.
you.
Okay. Bye bye.